Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's first session of LitFestX. We are joined with us with Mr. Shankkar Aiyar, who's a very well-known journalist, author, analyst. He was one of the first people who scooped the news of India pledging its gold reserve to the Bank of England during India's worst economic crisis. And his expose of this very hush-hush operation brought home to Indians and the world the magnitude of India's economic woes at that point in time. He has broken numerous front page news reports, headlines, and he is very well known in India and abroad for his columns and his writings. He's an award-winning journalist. He specializes in the interface of politics and economics. He majored in economics from Bombay University and has been a Chevening Fellow at Cambridge University, where he studied the life cycles of emerging economies. No better person for today's topic, which is why India needs Big Bang reforms. Shankkar, welcome to LitFestX.
Thank you. I'm happy to be talking to you and to the wider audience on the network.
Thanks, Shankkar. Shankkar, India obviously started on its journey of reforms, economic reforms and liberalization, a few decades ago. But we've had this checkered sort of history of flip-flopping on Big Bang reforms, either because of lack of political will or because of governments not being able to muster enough majority to pass some of them. What has been your sort of sense of, Big Bang reforms in India over the last many years?
Well, my book, Accidental India, actually looks at 7 decades of transformative change. And the book opens with liberalization, where I've called that chapter Bonfire of Vanities. Because for about 5 decades or so, we believed that government could fix who will produce what at what price, sell to whom at what price and where, and so on and so forth. This is basically, this kind of license Raj actually held India back. And that story is known. What is not sufficiently known is that all major changes in India have only come when there has been a major crisis or at the intersection of politics and economics, like bank nationalization or software revolution or the midday meal scheme, which was the precursor to the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and ramped up enrollment and literacy rates in India. So for every change, India's politicians are unable to confront which choice to make. I think choice paralyzes them because status quo is much more easier. And so for every decade, you will see the same story, that they will take the step only when absolutely necessary. I mean, if you go back the last 10, 15 years, what are the 2 major reforms India is waiting for now? One is the goods and services tax. This journey started in 2003. We are in 2015, and we are unable to still resolve this issue despite 3 different empowered committees, 3 governments. This is the 4th government which is looking at the goods and services tax. Same story it was for the companies law, which started in 2002 and got passed in 2013. The land acquisition problems have been known for probably 20 years, and the UPA passed a bill which made them anti-industry. The NDA's attempt to repair that has given them a sort of optics of anti-farmer. Fact is that the political system is unable to present a vision, communicate the vision, articulate that vision, and take the people along. For one, now we have a prime minister who's communicating, but even he is struggling when it comes to major reforms like GST, land acquisition, and all. But the problem is with the definition of Big Bang reforms, really. So, to a large part of the society, everybody has a different idea of what is Big Bang reforms. So, first we have to arrive at the definition of what is Big Bang reforms. So, Big Bang reforms are not necessarily the headlines that you see in the pink papers or on TV channels. Big Bang reforms, when at least when I say Big Bang reforms, I mean reforms that deliver a bigger bang for the buck. The Indian taxpayers' money, how it is utilized, what it's utilized on, and how efficiently it delivers growth. That is, to my mind, the simplest definition of Big Bang reforms. Now, if you speak with the Indian political class, they will give you many stories about consensus, about us being unique, about India being a complex democracy. And yet they will also claim that the big changes that came in the last 70 years came despite all these qualifications and alibis and excuses that they present. Let me just give you one example of the idea of what is Big Bang reforms. This year, Government of India will borrow 1600 crore rupees every day. Okay, now that's roughly $250 million. I mean, give or take how you adjust the exchange rate. Why are we borrowing 1600 crore rupees? Because the government's income and its expenditure is mismatched. Where is it most visible? Is in the public programs that the government runs. Where is the most money lost? The most money is lost in delivery of public services. So every year, state electricity boards lose 1 lakh crore. Now divide that by 365 days to get a sense of how much we lose per day. And that's close to about 200 crore rupees. Every day, public sector units in India are running losses of about 70 crores. Then you look at the other issues like PDS, subsidy leakage, and roughly mota moti, as they say in India, governments in India, states and center, lose about 450 crores per day. Now, when I talk about Big Bang reforms, what I indicate or I want addressed is that first, for these losses to be stopped, we have had two different programs to bail out state electricity boards in the last 10 years. Both have failed. Now the government of India is looking at another way to solve the problem of bankruptcy. I mean, just to flash back, what's happening in the power sector? What's happening is power plants are running at 50 to 60% of plant load factor, which means 40% idle capacity. Why are they doing that? Because state electricity boards do not have the money to buy power with more power or more expensive power. So simply we have a system now, and we have created this, governments have created this. We have sellers and we have encouraged new sellers without providing for buyers. And the state electricity boards are monopolies largely. So unless you stop this loss, and what is the loss? It's essentially theft, it's burglary, and it is political rent. So unless you stop that, you won't be able to fix the problem. So the government of India is trying one more time the old idea of repackaging debt, bringing down their interest rates, and so on and so forth. Now, unless you address the inefficiency in the system, which is led to large non-performing assets, all the banks are stressed. And why are they stressed? And how much is it? Over $90 billion is stuck as bad debt or poor stressed assets among banks. Now, this problem has to be resolved. And we have been trying to see this problem being resolved for 10, 12 years. But again, the political system is such that is unable to confront the solution. We are the only country where we can brilliantly stare at a solution and problem simultaneously. We know what the solution is. We don't want to do it because we think there is a political cost to doing it. At the same time, we don't realize there is a price the economy is paying for not doing the right thing. So Big Bang reforms means transformative change in the manner and method in which governments, center and states, use the hard-earned money of the taxpayer. And I don't mean just the income taxpayer. Even the poorest guy pays tax when he buys a matchbox or when he recharges his mobile coupon. For every 100 rupees of talk time a poor guy in a village buy, he's paying 14 rupees as service tax. That goes to the government. And so we have to address these issues. And when I talk about Big Bang reforms, this is what I mean. And this is what needs to be communicated.
Shankkar, you mentioned, about the issues of the power sector and also, the NPAs as a whole, which is plaguing the banking sector. Uh, the government has in the past, given out messages about banking sector reform, about merger of, several banks to create larger super banks, cleaning up the NPAs, etc. Where do you think this is all going? Because clearly, over the years, irrespective of whatever measures, year on year, NPAs have just risen.
So there are two parts to the story. One is that we are probably the only financial system in the world where the lender borrows short term and lends long term. By definition, his capacity to appreciate long term risks and short term risks are compromised. Now they're making some adjustments to this. But over the last 15 years, ever since ICICI, IDBI, and IFCI, which were the development finance institutions, got sort of submerged with the whole banking idea. That's the first problem. The second problem is that we don't really have a long-term debt market. So if you see the government of India 10-year bonds and all, now people are buying it in retail, but it's still through mutual funds and stuff. So we don't have a very deep, active, robust, long-term debt market for companies to access. The third problem is the bigger problem. In 1991, we dismantled the license Raj. So you didn't require licenses to produce. But we kept the permit Raj intact. So no matter which government comes, in the last 10 years, consistently you will see projects worth about 10 lakh crore pending for some clearance or the other. Now, when an entrepreneur goes and launches a project and he has to wait for clearances, and this is what the Prime Minister has been talking about, the ease of doing business. It takes as much as 3 years for him to get the clearances. For a power project in India, it takes 95 clearances, including one from the Director General of Civil Aviation, on the height of the chimney. If you want to set up a hotel, it takes about 140 clearances. Now, some of these clearances are in the center and some of them are in the states. The approach of this government has been on speedier clearances, which is what I call incrementalism, gradualism. What should the approach be? Should the guy who's putting up a factory, say in Kanpur or in Gindi or in Chakan in Maharashtra, have to go to the center for a clearance at all? If you make a flow chart of the clearances, it will look like the poetry version of the going round the mulberry bush, because every time he takes a clearance with the state, he goes and gets it endorsed in the center, and every time he does in the center, he gets. So this flow chart has to be shrunk for the time taken for clearances to be brought down. Now, once this happens, you have taken away all the excuses of the entrepreneur for not setting up his project. There are power projects just now which have been set up for the last 3 and 4 years, which have not declared commercial outlet. There are factories that were supposed to start in 2012 which haven't started still. But they have borrowed money and they are not earning money to return. So obviously you're going to come into a situation which is generally called as falling between two rocks. And this is where the NPAs are getting created. There is also a very deep politicization of the banking sector. So people who don't deserve money, who have no intention of returning money. Everybody knows about the airline which borrowed money, which converted debt into equity, went bust, and nobody knows whether any of that money will come back. People are also talking about a steel plant which has borrowed more money than the next 2 steel plants put together. How are these guys getting the money? What is the checks and balance in the system? So these are the issues. I mean, for years now we've spoken about cleaning up this system, but we must accept a political issue involved here. It is that India's business model of politics is funded by unknown funds. Until we repair that, you will have situations like this. So the NPAs are actually a creation of this strange beast called the Indian political business model and the Indian governance model.
Very, very well put, Shankar, and certainly, we can always expect you to, call a spade a spade. And as you just said, a lot of the NPAs, whether we like it or not, and whether we accept it or not, are basically being rerouted for other projects, whether those are fighting elections or political parties, or taking money abroad by these promoters. And clearly, if you look at some of the large borrowers in the country, they are almost evergreen borrowers. We know for a fact that that amount of money, several $billion per borrower, is never going to make it back into the banking system. So larger projects get imagined and sometimes delivered just to keep the borrowing limit increased. You mentioned something very important in terms of what Prime Minister Modi has been talking about, the ease of doing business, which of course is not just linked to NPAs, but also making India a more competitive destination and a country. We've been 18 months roughly into this new government. What do you see as some of the big wins or the big misses of this government's sort of reforms and policies?
So, very precisely, if I were to put this, Prime Minister Modi has spoken and speaks about everything that we want to hear. He says all the right things. He's got great titles for all his programs, but he's got a team which obviously lacks capacity. He's working with a system that is somewhere in the 19th century. So people of India live in the 21st century. The systems are somewhere between 19th and 20th century. Just to give you an idea of how this happens, is that all taxes, revenues, much of it is collected at the center and then given to the states. Most policies are first developed at the center and adopted by the states. The center has the right to design a policy. The state has no say in it or very little say in it. The states have the accountability to implement policy, and the center can do very little whether the state does it or not. So if you look at whether it is human development indices, whether it is investment, most times you will find that India's performance is way below promise, and citizens deal with suboptimal services. Particularly on the issue of ease of doing business. The primary thing that the government of India must do is to hold a special session of parliament and see how this multi-layered accountability system that we have, where authority is divorced from accountability. So authority is with the center and states have the account. This has to be dismantled, and this entire confusion is vested in a piece of document in the constitution called the concurrent list. So there are several things with both the center and states too. It boggles my mind to understand what exactly can the rural development ministry of the center understand about rural development in the state. So there has to be some way to dismantle this confusion and these layers and layers and layers of decision making. In terms of ease of doing business, the primary problem has been that on everything that actually should be done by the state and within the state, the districts, we now have a competitive ranking of states on ease of doing business. The real ranking should be among districts as to who has the best skill manpower, who has the best power, who has the best systems. So those things have to be developed further, and the states must be fully empowered. I mean, we are treating states as the colonies of the center. And so we are still in the empire mold, the colonization mode. So this has to change for real ease of business. I mean, everybody talks about China. One of the reasons for success of China is a lot of their success is bottom up, not top down. At least there is great alignment between what Beijing thinks and what Shenzhen thinks. And most times Beijing accepts what Shenzhen thinks, or what Guangdong thinks, or what Hong Kong says. So there is a better appreciation of the bottom-up approach, and that's how things work. You look at most progressive economies, that is the real story. So Prime Minister Modi has unveiled 3 or 4 very important ideas. One is Swachh Bharat, which is actually a cultural revolution that needs to happen. No country can expect better health indicators and more tourism, better living standards with the kind of filth that we are surrounded by. And the problem there is that after Swachh Bharat, the capacity building that is required at the municipal level and the state government level is not available, primarily because the states treat the municipal bodies as subedaris, as kind of their little principalities or colonies, if I may say so. And so the transfer of revenue is very poor, the transfer of power, empowerment is very poor. You take the issue of Make in India. It's a great idea. I don't think anybody has branded it so well in the past. And it's about creating a competitive India. Now, to create the competitive in India, center has to yield to states. So there are many ideas that he has come up with, but there is a great need for the states to be empowered. And this is a great opportunity. You know, the BJP is ruling in 11 states, and maybe after Bihar, it will be 12 states, whatever. So you have to disempower the center and empower the states for a lot of this change to happen. And this is what I say is big bang reforms. You dismantle the planning commission, and you created the Niti Aayog, but what next? And so that's the thinking, the throughput that has to come, the scenario mapping that has to happen hasn't happened. And I think he is handicapped by a team which is young, inexperienced, and is suffering from severe centralization.
Very, very aptly put, Shankkar. We've almost come to the end of the session. I'm seeing a stream of questions for you on Twitter. I'm just going to pick one up and then we'll end the session. So this is from Megha, and she says, what are India's biggest victories in the last decade, despite political unrest and crisis of leadership? Maybe I think you could just focus on that one big, victory which you have seen despite political unrest and crisis of leadership.
So, despite a vacuum in political thinking, we now have two parties who know what they stand against, but cannot articulate what they stand for. And despite that, democracy has sustained. And so the biggest victory is the people power. We've had change, transitions in states and center. And in every state, people are voting for a government, for change, for governance. And so I think that the biggest victory in India is the awakening among people that they can't take it anymore, and that they deserve better, that India deserves better. That is really the big victory. Now, it has to be propelled further for real change to arrive. And that is where I call the partnership of the sovereign, which is the people. Some of our ministers have a misconception about who's sovereign, and they talk about the parliament being sovereign. It is the people who are sovereign. It is the people who elect them and send them to parliament. So people are sovereign. They are the principals. And those who get elected and are in government are really the agents of the principles, which is the sovereign of the people. But to come back to what is the greatest victory is the awakening among Indians and in India that India deserves better.
Fantastic, Shankkar. Clearly, I couldn't agree more. I think the last few years, as you very rightly put, has seen the galvanization of the democratic power back to the people, in terms of their willingness to come out and vote, in terms of higher voter turnouts, higher engagement with the democratic process, whether it is on social media or, mass media. Thank you so much, Shankkar, for spending time with us and for sharing some brilliant insights on India's economic future and the past as well. And we look forward to some great work from you going ahead. I think we need to see another big book coming out from you very
Yep.
soon.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And one is thinking and one has to get down to writing. So there's that gap there, but it will happen.
Great.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. All the best. Bye
All right.
bye.